Good evening and welcome once again to the weekly episode of Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk all things on the field, off the field, Washington Commanders. And of course, as you know, from week to week, listening or watching the weekly stream, there's never a shortage of topics to talk about. And even after such a dismal loss that takes us to a quote from Ron Rivera, a low point of the season, there's still a lot to talk about. There's such a charge and dynamic in the fan base and local media that even in the end of the Snyder era kind of wasn't parallel to what we're seeing now. And there's a lot of talk, a lot of chatter about what should happen, what could happen, what's going to happen now for the rest of the season, as well as moving into the off season, kind of after this last week's dismal performance against the New York Giants, and kind of where do we go from there, right? But as we always know, with each weekly episode, we kind of like to start off the show with some off the field news. And of course, you know, one of the things that kind of is a downfall to having the show on Tuesday night, but it kind of is a good thing because then it gives you stuff to talk about the following week, is there's usually always something that happens off the field from a business perspective or team perspective that's not X's and O's about the Washington Commanders. And on November 15th, actually, I guess it was last Wednesday, as I woke up the next morning after last week's episode, it's interesting to note that the Washington Commanders actually entered into another new business partnership. And this business partnership is actually one that's not directly related to the team and the stadium or business practices or food and beverage, but more for the infrastructure of the team itself, right? And what do I mean by that? The latest business partner was Clark Construction. And it actually is kind of very interesting that Clark Construction becomes a team's official construction partner, so to speak, per the press release that was put out by the Commanders. But, you know, Clark is, for those of you that don't know, Clark Construction is probably one of the biggest construction contracting outfits in the DMV, you know, and they're known for a lot of their excellence and innovations across a wide range of local projects. You know, they actually constructed FedEx Field, Capital One Arena, Nationals Park down in the Navy Yard where the Nationals play. And, you know, Clark Construction brings over that 100 years of experience and commitment to the DMV community, right? So with that, you know, not only is Clark Construction going to be, you know, as they dubbed the official construction partner of the Commanders, you know, it's a chance for Clark Construction to give back to the communities where they live and build and reside, is what team president Jason Wright said. Clark Construction shares the values and understands the responsibility to make a difference in the community that the Washington Commanders have as some of their priorities. So as part of this multi-year partnership, Clark Construction is actually going to be a presenting partner of new and ongoing community initiatives, which include, you know, the Trees for Yards sustainability program, the high school football media day that the Commanders do every year, as well as, you know, basically entitled the Commanders' new video series, Constructing the Commanders, which will give fans an opportunity to follow the team during the off season. And they kind of started rolling that out last year, even before the new ownership group came in. Something new, something different to kind of go through how the process was of selling the team and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see what the video series puts together. But beginning this year, Clark Construction is also going to be doing the Washington Commanders Charitable Foundation 21st Annual Harvest Feast, which actually takes place this week and next week. Washington legends, command force, and command front office staff will be partnering to basically deliver food and turkeys and Thanksgiving meals to local shelters throughout Prince George's County and Washington, D.C. proper this Thanksgiving, which has kind of always been a staple of the team in the local area, right? But it's just another way for that partnership to kind of present itself and start the groundwork of networking and that interconnection between the team and the business. Where this actually plays into bigger things is there's a lot of speculation amongst the DC media and team insiders that this partnership, not only because they had it when FedEx Stadium was built in 92 to 94, completed with the team opening and start playing in 1994. But as we know, the team is actually going through the hoops of trying to determine a new stadium location, building a new stadium to replace FedEx Field, wherever that's determined to be. So it's kind of just a logic, assumption that Clark Construction is going to be tabbed to do the new stadium project whenever that is determined to commence, right? And the other thing that's kind of interesting with that is, in all honesty, a new stadium probably won't get started until 25, maybe 26, probably sometime in 25 if it was an educated guess. But also either a revamp or a reconstruction, which reconstruction is kind of more along the lines of where it's going to go, in the fact that practice facilities over in Ashburn. So, not only are we going to get a new stadium, but I kind of foresee a new training complex. Whether or not we get rid of the bubble, I think we do get rid of the bubble over in Ashburn, and as well as just kind of a new practice facility over there, new gyms, new offices, new headquarters, yada, yada, yada. But I think it's kind of going to be one and the same and wired into the Clark Construction partnership. But of course, before you can look to the future and replacing the stadium as well as the practice facilities over in Ashburn, you kind of got to look at, basically the dump of FedEx Field. And as we know, on an annual basis, whether it's by players, whether it's by fans, whether it's by, whoever, basically FedEx Field is ranked in the bottom 5 and is most recently in an anonymous players poll that is actually ranked number 2 worst, second worst stadium to play at, be at, experience, or whatever. And, where would we be without another stadium failure, right? We know the poop incident from last year and the sewage that leaked down on the fans. We know the fact of seating, and we know just, story after story and incident after incident of, shittiness at FedEx Field. We know the ownership dumped around 50 to 60 million into the offseason into the stadium. But unfortunately, after the Giants and Commanders game, apparently it was reported that only cold water had been working. So basically the hot water was either turned off or not functioning after the game, which meant that both teams, including our own after the dismal loss, had to take cold showers at FedEx Field, which is kind of interesting because, you kind of wondered why guys, especially Commanders, were available so quickly after the game for post-game pressers. And of course, lo and behold, about an hour after the game, maybe not even that long, it came out that, hey, look, there was no hot water available, especially in the Commanders locker room. And then, basically confirmed subsequently that, as well as the Giants side, that there was no hot water, which kind of just adds to the list of problems at FedEx and why the stadium needs to be replaced, why there needs to be a new one, things that need to be fixed, things that need to be upgraded, just find the laundry list and, let's go from there and figure out what's going on and what's happening to try and get a better stadium, not only for the fans, but also for the teams that are either visiting and as well as our own team to try and put the best product on the field. So kind of moving from, the non-X's and O's into the X's and O's, so to speak. Look, we went into the game this past weekend kind of knowing that, I don't want to say it was a must win, but it was borderline must win, to the fact that it was a game we should have won, right? And, unfortunately, after this game, For the 32nd consecutive year, Washington will now not win at least 11 regular season games. So, barring the December collapse by the Detroit Lions, who have actually been putting together some pretty decent, consistent winning seasons the last 2 years, every other team in the NFL has done it at least twice in that span of 32 years. And basically, that goes back to the last consecutive seasons that Washington was able to put together 11 win seasons, which was their Super Bowl back in 91, 92. So it's definitely a long period of time that, for whatever reason, we just can't string together consecutive 11 regular season wins. Now, that's not to say, we haven't had consecutive winning seasons. That's just to say we haven't had winning seasons where we've had 11 wins, which is typically getting you into past a divisional round, or at least into a divisional round of playoffs. And, it's kind of interesting that, you look at records and whether it was Ron Rivera's current tenure, as we're going to discuss later on, or whether in the Jay Gruden era, or even, through coaches before that, Shanahan and yada, yada, yada. We've just never been able to string that stuff together, going into, well, let's call it a world and level of mediocrity and subpar performance that, only our team can do. So then the question becomes, look, well, what happened on Sunday to kind of put us where we are, and what happened in the Giants game? And we did some really things well, good things well. We did fairly okay on defense. We did decent on special teams, and the score didn't necessarily reflect the performance of the game. Look, let's be honest. It should have been 24-19 at the end of the game. Sam Howell tried to throw away a ball with like 40 seconds left in the game off his back foot, tried to throw it out of bounds. Unfortunately, he didn't get it that far, got picked off, pick six, ended up being 31-19. So in all reality, it was basically a 24-19 game, one that we should have won even on some other drives. But, the problem that we had this game, lo and behold, it wasn't coaching. It wasn't necessarily straight offensive line performance. It wasn't straight defensive collapse, the whole 9 yards. It was literally turnovers. When you have 6 turnovers, 5 on the offense, you're not going to win the game. I don't care who you're playing. It could have been Arizona or, an early Denver team when they absolutely sucked, of which now Denver's on a hot roll out there with Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. But, whether it's playing the Patriots, playing the Giants, playing the Cowboys or the Eagles or any other high-profile team, offensive team, or defense for that matter, when you have more than 3 turnovers, you're not going to win the game. And unfortunately, like I said, we had 6. And, for whatever reason, Sam Howell just had one of his bad days. He had 3 interceptions himself. Couple that with 2 fumbles by running backs who just couldn't hold on to the ball. Actually, one by a running back, one by a wide receiver. And then, a fumble / muff on special teams. And lo and behold, you're going to turn the ball over, right? But overall, aside from the, kind of, like I said, we kind of ride or die with Sam Howell. Which Sam Howell are you going to get for the game? And in this game, Sam Howell finished 31 of 45 for 255 yards, only 1 touchdown, but 3 interceptions. And that's kind of, a trend that we hadn't been seeing from Sam Howell over the last probably 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks, where, Sam Howell is kind of the opposite. He was going to give you 2 or 3 touchdowns, maybe in one case 4 touchdowns a game, but 0 or 1 interceptions. Look, the kid's still a rookie. It's only like his 12th game, maybe 13th game in his career. So that there's going to be a roller coaster this year. Not every game is going to be perfect. Not every game that he has is going to be good. And unfortunately, this was one of the bad games. And probably even the shitty part about it was that it came against a bad team. And I think when you couple or compound a bad game from Sam Howell to a bad team in the New York Giants, it just makes everything worse. And it makes fans more salty. It makes fans more toxic. It makes fans more knee-jerk reactive and what they want to see and who they want to see gone and stuff like that, to the point that there's a lot of times where, on social media, you're basically going to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling because you don't have time to reply to all the nonsense that goes on about your team on a daily basis. But look, even B Rob didn't have a bad day. He led the rushing with 17 carries, 73 yards. And as funny as it sounds, and you kind of got to ask yourself why, but it kind of is what it is, that B Rob also led receiving with 7 receptions for 58 yards. Look, one of the things that's a big, I don't want to say concern, so to speak, but kind of makes you wonder, in EB's offense with Sam Howell, there's not particularly a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, even though they're listed on the depth chart. But where you see the difference between the Commanders and other good teams, let's throw out, Philadelphia Eagles. Let's look at, the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers, Dallas Cowboys, even the Baltimore Ravens, everybody that's playing good right now, is you make plays or design things to get the ball into your key players' hands. And we don't do that very well. So, we should be figuring out ways to get the ball into McLaurin and Dotson's hands. Keep B Rob rushing, right? Hey, look, as Danny says, how will be okay. How he responds is key in the next game. And unfortunately, being on a short week with only, 4 days to get ready before the game on Thanksgiving, which we're going to preview later on in the show, it'll be interesting to see what happens. They're not going to have any time to do true practices. Yesterday was basically a meeting in films. Today was the beginning of installations for the team, as far as basically installations. For those of you who don't know, is how they're going to basically game plan or tackle the upcoming opponent from an offensive and defensive perspective, right? So most of you know, or some of you may not know, that the first, in some cases, 15, 20, 25 plays of every game offensively is actually scripted. Now, whether those plays carry you for the first entire drive or, 2 drives, it kind of depends on the game situation, right? If you go 3 and out, then you still got a lot of scripted plays to go. If you have a long sustained drive on your first drive of the game where you're going 10, 12, 13 plays or more, then you might wipe out, your entire script and kind of go from there. But Tuesdays, especially on a short week, are basically installation days where you take everything you learned from film of the previous week. You take the meetings of the position groups that you had, and that's kind of where the coordinators on both sides, as well as position coaches, come together with the groups of offensive, defensive players and say, look, what are we going to do on Thursday, short week, against the Dallas Cowboys, and kind of put a game plan together how we're going to attack the Dallas Cowboys, both offensively, defensively, and even special teams to some extent, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But anyhow, since Sam Howell is on the short week, it'll be interesting to see how he reacts and what's going on. But it's definitely not an easy game going into Thanksgiving against the Dallas Cowboys, who we'll talk about in a little bit. And, as Dan says, I think Washington will play better next game. I think they will. You hate to say it, but Washington also has a really high tendency to play to their opponent, right? So, and the reason I say that is both games of the New York Giants, the Chicago Bears, we played down. We lost all 3, right? When we played Philadelphia, we almost won both of those games. We almost beat Seattle. We should have beat Seattle. We should have beat Philly both times. So, it's almost like we, for whatever reason, play to the level of our opponent, which, we shouldn't do. We should just be playing high all the time, but it kind of is what it is. So what do you know? Tommy, I still live at home and my mom does my laundry. DeVito showed up, basically balled out against us, was 18 for 26, 246 yards and 3 touchdowns. The kid came in third string quarterback for the New York Giants after Danny Dimes and Tyrod Taylor are out with injuries, and did what he had to do to get the victory. He helped his team get 24 points on the board. Like I said, the last touchdown was basically a pick 6 for the defense. And, one of the areas that we talked about at extent, whether it was on the Thursday night NFC East War Room, where we talk trash and predict our upcoming games for our individual teams, or as well as I was fortunate enough to be a guest on the Big Blue Power Hour on Sunday mornings at 11 and talk to their hosts about, the game preview between the Giants and the Commanders of what each team needs to do to kind of pull off the victory. And one of the repeating themes between the Big Blue Power Hour and myself as a Commander's Gridiron was what was Saquon Barkley going to do. And Barkley, had 14 carries for 83 yards. And I felt that for the Commanders to win this game, of which they should have had they not turned the ball over so many times and killed so many drives, was to limit Barkley to under 100 yards rushing and basically keep his exposure to a minimum. Now, he did turn around and kill us with 2 receptions for touchdowns, which we'll get to in a little bit. But, in the grand scheme of things, we did an overall decent job, minus the 2 receiving touchdowns, at keeping, Barkley kind of quiet, so to speak. But, look, it's basically what it came down to, the turnovers again, right? And like Danny said, basically 57 yards receiving, yep, and 83 yards rushing, so all in all, like, he was minimum. But it kind of is what it is. And as Eddie chimes in, look, Hal isn't the issue. I don't think Hal is the issue. And, certainly, Hal is definitely in, let's call it the top half of quarterbacks. He's not elite. He's not great. He's not top 10, maybe borderline number 15 to 20. If you put him in the right system with a decent to good offensive line, Hal will literally be a 15 to 20 NFL quarterback every week, any given day, right? But like I said, it definitely comes to be, the turnovers, and he's going to have a bad game. Kind of like Kenny Pickett for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Up and down, up and down, up and down, and then hopefully he levels out and gets the stuff out of his system so that he can play consistently, right? And Dan's absolutely right. He's where you want him to be. That, he keeps trending upward. Gonna have a bad game. We know that, or at least I know that. And I'm willing to accept that as long as, look, the next couple of games he keeps going. Are we going to win Thursday? Probably not. We'll get to that when we talk about the preview. But, it kind of is what it is, to the point that, it'll be interesting to see what happens moving on the rest of the season. Eddie says that, hey, Sweat and Young would have helped if they were not traded. Kind of yes and no. So it's super interesting that, so far, I think in the 2 weeks since they've been traded, even though they didn't play the first week, but okay, so essentially we're only looking at 1 game for both of them respectively. I think Montez Sweat maybe 2 compared to Chase Young's 1. They're at like 2.5 to 3 combined sacks between them both. But I think it's also the system and the environment that they're playing in, right? There was a lot of egos and isolation and me's on that defensive front. And let's call it as it is, that it was basically more on the defensive ends, edge rushers, than the interior, i.e. Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne. So, when you throw Montez Sweat into a star-studded defensive roster and scheme like the 49ers, where you have an explosive front with Bosa, stellar linebackers, which Washington doesn't have, as well as a really good secondary, which is better than Washington's, there's going to be more potential for Young to do a lot better. Subsequently, you look at Chicago, and Chicago's not that bad, especially on defense. But when you bring somebody in who can make some noise like Montez Sweat, be a good combination to their defensive front, and go well with their linebacking core, even though their secondary is suspect, you'll get some productivity out of Montez Sweat. We also know, look, both of those guys weren't going to be coming back next year, so you kind of had to get rid of them and get what you can get. So as Eddie says, hey, Steve, do you want an offensive-minded head coach to replace Rivera? I would honestly say yes to that, only because, look, let's be honest, in today's NFL, if you get a head coach that is not necessarily the play caller or the offensive coordinator, 2 things are going to happen. A, you're going to get a really good offensive coordinator, and probably within 1 to 2 years, he's going to be gone because he's going to be a head coach or another offensive coordinator somewhere else. That's number 1. Number 2, if you don't make that person the number 1 as far as the head coach, then you don't necessarily have a good probability to maintain the continuity growth and relationship between the coordinator and the quarterback that you need to basically be consistent for, let's call it like 4 to 5 years, hopefully longer, but in at least that 3 to 5 year window, right? Which kind of goes back to point number one, that if you only have a good offensive coordinator who's not the head coach, then that quarterback's going to be getting used to offensive coordinator turnover, which you don't need for a young quarterback, especially who's on his rookie deal, trying to, A, make the team better, and B, make a name for himself that he can be your franchise quarterback moving forward. So, like I said, when you kind of look at things in this game, it wasn't an overly high scoring game, which, between myself and the Big Blue Power Hour kind of predicted. Hi, Eileen. What's up? Thanks for tuning in tonight. That, we kind of predicted it was going to be 20s, mid 20s ish to speak for scoring. And, look, it didn't let us hang, right? So obviously the Giants started off with a 24-yard touchdown pass to Saquon Barkley, got them up 7-0. Commanders go down, turn the ball over, but then, on another drive, they were lucky enough to basically sneak out a Joey Slye 23-yard field goal. But then the Giants turn around, get a 40-yard pass to Slayton, make it 14-3. Sam Howell gets the 7-yard touchdown run, which, kind of started a little skirmish, if you will, between players. While I would have certainly loved to see some more players kind of go to war and jump on the back of Sam Howell for what happened, especially once he got pushed out of bounds, it was nice to see somebody even as, scrimpy as Curtis Samuel, wide receiver, kind of jump into the fray and stick up for his quarterback, even though he got a 15-yard penalty. But, it kind of is what it is, right? But that's the kind of stuff you want to see between teammates when something like that happens, whether it's your quarterback, whether it's your running back, whether it's another wide receiver, guys that are going to stick up for their teammates. And like I said, while it would have been nice to see like 3 or 4 more guys jump into the mess, I'm definitely grateful for Curtis Samuel, and I forget the offensive lineman that jumped in there as well. Whether it's, pushing and shoving, whether it's, hopefully not full-blown fighting where you're going to get ejected, but at least kind of make the statement, hey, you're not going to mess with our guys, right? And as Danny says, they didn't blow a whistle, and I don't know why. And that's 100% right. He was in the first time too. I think he was too. Look, all it takes is to cross the plane of the end zone. You don't have to go into the end zone. You just have to cross basically the front half of that like 3-inch line or however big it is now. And I think Sam Howell did that the first time, but then, he bumps, jumps out, bumps again, and then tries to, to make the pylon by the end. And you kind of saw the little fracas afterwards. They kind of did what it did. But, so after the missed extra point, which I kind of thought was going to come back to hurt us, and it kind of didn't, minus all the turnovers. It didn't really become a valid point anyhow. But, then Washington turns around, kicks another field goal, 42-yarder by Joey Slye to make it 14-12. But then, lo and behold, in the fourth quarter, another touchdown pass, 5-yarder to Saquon Barkley. So it now makes his 2 for the day, which I said, kind of was the thing that killed us, so to speak. Aside from the turnovers, was how much would Saquon Barkley affect the game? And he definitely did, let's be honest, right? But then the G-men turn around, 36-yard field goal to make it 24-12. Jahan Dotson gets Sam Howell's only throwing touchdown of the day, 8-yard touchdown pass to make it 24-19. This is where I kind of thought, and Dan and I were talking around on each other's shows about, it basically comes down to the last 2 to 3 minutes of each game between the Giants, because for whatever reason, no matter how bad or crappy we are, the Giants and the Commanders seem to always play each other really hard, really tight, really well, right? And, I was like, holy crap, this is where, the Commanders will turn around, drive down the field, and score a touchdown, or because they need one, or end up with a field goal, lose the game, super close, and, go off. But like I said, Sam Howell tries to throw the ball away to save a little bit of time on the clock with, with 2 more downs to go. Ends up dropping back under deep pressure, throws the ball off his back foot. The ball doesn't quite make it out of bounds. Simmons ends up picking it off for a pick 6 for a 54-yard interception run in return. So basically, the score ended up 31-19, even though it was truly, basically a 24-19 game. And, look, let's be honest. Let's look at the stats that from a statistical performance, the Commanders should have won this game in every aspect, right? They had 403 total yards to the G-Men's 292, so a little over 100 yards total more in offense than the Giants. Passing yards was almost even, 229 to 201. Rushing yards was way in the Commanders' favor, which is what we wanted to see because we had to shut down Barkley and company to be somewhat successful. And we had 174 yards to the Giants' 91. Average yards per play was about the same, a little over 5. Okay, that's cool, whatever. But then, you got to look at, first downs, Commanders had 28 to the Giants 13. Our third down efficiency was pretty much even with the Giants, but, both 5 out of 13 for us, 5 out of 14 for the G-Men. We were successful on our only fourth down try. And, we outdid, not necessarily hawked time of possession and ball control, but we did win the time of possession game, basically 35 minutes to 25, which resulted us having 77 total plays to the Giants 20 or to Giants 54. Two things that really stuck out is the number of sacks allowed, which for us, the first time around in playing the Giants, we gave up 9 or 10, almost double digits, which was probably one of our biggest contributing factors to losing to the G-Men the first time around earlier in the season. We only gave up 4 this time. So it is interesting to see that the offensive line changes over the last 3 weeks have definitely worked. We're not anywhere close to giving up, 7, 8, 9, 12 sacks a game, which is really good for Sam Howell. But we're still giving up a lot of hurries, a lot of rushes, making him do quick reads, making him not necessarily get through all of his progressions. We only punted twice, which was super nice. But, then it comes to turnovers, right? Where we had 3 fumbles, 3 interceptions, for a total of 6 turnovers to the Giants, 0. And like I said, anytime you're in the NFL and you try to win a game with 3 or more turnovers, it's not going to happen and you're not going to win. Unfortunately, no matter how good your offense is, no matter how good your defense is, it's just not going to work, right? So it's going to be super interesting to see, kind of where they go from here and what happens. But, one of the things that was super interesting was the fact of, it's interesting. Hey, Dave, what's going on? Thanks for tuning in tonight. It'll be interesting to see how we do against your team coming up on Thursday. Good old Turkey Day. Gobble, gobble. But, before we preview the Cowboys game, one of the things that, I want to touch base with was basically the press conference of Ron Rivera post-game against the Giants. And trust me, before the final whistle even blew and the stadium was emptied and everybody left the parking lot at FedEx, there was so many posts on social media between all outlets and platforms calling for the resignation of not only defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio, but also head coach Ron Rivera. And while I usually don't typically try to find or listen to, watch, whatever you want to call it, the post-game pressers right away, I usually do it later on Sunday night in between commercials or games, or even on Monday, kind of just as a review of the game. But it kind of kept popping up on my feeds that like, hey, look, Ron Rivera is doing his post-game presser. Let's see what's going on. And while it was kind of short and sweet, it was definitely a different tone, definitely a different demeanor from Ron Rivera for this press conference. And, I think he knows the magnitude of where our team is, or where it isn't, is probably more appropriate. What the next week's game means, even though it's probably against one of our hardest 3 opponents, as well as put that on a short week on a national stage. And, it is what it is, right? But it was kind of interesting that, look, all the local insiders who I referenced numerous times on our podcast here at Commanders Gridiron, I'll start with the first one, Scott Abraham from 7 News out of DC, team insider, raised a very valid question to Coach Rivera during his presser. And he said, look, I asked Commanders head coach Ron Rivera how he can defend where this team is at in the year number 4 of his tenure, given our record, given the game that just happened against the New York Giants. And Rivera's answer was, quote, "If I answer a question like that, then I'm making an excuse." Now, a lot of people criticized and fried Coach Rivera for not answering the question. There was a lot of basically similar questions of how do you evaluate today's game? How do you look at the performance of today's game and the players, yada, yada, yada. And he basically kind of kept saying the same thing. Look, I'm not going to give you an answer because you guys are going to take that. The media is going to take that and run with it as me making an excuse. And while I can't fault the coach 100% for making that reaction and having that statement, you kind of want him to be more honest and candid about the state of the team, why things happened the way they did. Why did we have 6 turnovers? Why did we have a good offensive performance and a decent, not great, defensive performance? And we still lost the game to a lowly Giants team, right? So Ron Rivera continues to say, look, what happens beyond the end of the season, that's not in my control. I can't focus on what I can't control. I can only control what's going on with this football team today and tomorrow. And, look, he knows the severity of him having a winning, not even a winning record, but a 500 season versus a losing record, possibly missing out on the playoffs and what that means for him returning next season. Let's be honest, he has to know that. He can't be that naive that, he doesn't realize the magnitude of what's going on with him and his coaching status and his team as well as his coaching staff, right? And as Eddie says, look, we are finding out why Eric Bieniemy hasn't gotten a head coach job. You kind of are and you aren't, right? That it's interesting to see where Bieniemy falls in the discussion of blame for this team and our current record and state of affairs, right? Look, even though the offense starts out slow every week and we usually are finding ourselves in a position to come back offensively and scoring, we're still putting up 20 to 30 points a game. And in some cases over the last 5 weeks, last 2 months, we've been putting up over 30 points a game. The problem is the defense turns around and gives it all back up. And, there's a lot of discussion about what will happen with Bieniemy going forward, even for the rest of the season versus next season. So, I think it'll be interesting to see, there's a lot of calls right now, like I said, for Rivera to be fired now. Look, I was 100% honest with people on social media as well as, friends and colleagues that Josh Harris is not going to fire. Look, I kind of eat my own words and say, look, Josh Harris doesn't fire coaches in the middle of the season, but he did it with Doc Rivers last season or the year before, right, with the Philadelphia 76ers. But traditionally with all of Harris's teams, he never fires a coach mid-season. That's number one. Number two, new ownership group is going to take the entire season to evaluate everything and see where we are. And then come Black Monday on January 8th, you're going to see a lot of pink slips for coaching staffs in Ashburn. That's kind of number two. Number three, a lot of your candidates for coaching aren't even going to be available mid to end season. So is there really a benefit of making coaching changes that to that extent, head coach, defensive coordinator, position coaches, whatever, mid-season with 6 games to go? That can be highly debated and contested, but it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Because, as we know, part of the things that put us in this position to begin with was the fact that the Commanders have allowed a league-high 88 explosive plays. What is an explosive play? That is basically, I think, a play that is 20-plus yards. So whether that's receiving, whether that's catching, the whole 9 yards, you kind of get the deal, right? So actually, it's 16-plus yards passing, 12-plus yards running is how it's defined by PFF, which is Pro Football Focus, who does all the stats and analytics for players and games, right? Which also includes a league high 65 explosive pass plays out of those 88. And of course, a lot of those were unfortunately to the extent of A.J. Brown in both Eagles games, a couple in the Denver Broncos game, Buffalo Bills game, and we still got some big teams to play yet. San Francisco, Miami, Dallas twice, the Rams, the whole 9 yards. So it'll be interesting where that goes. So those 65 explosive plays average 26.9 yards. So basically, out of all those explosive plays that we gave, especially for the passing one of 65 passing plays, we were giving up basically 26 yards a clip on those big plays. And you can't do that and still expect your offense to keep up with, that kind of production. So when you look at Rivera's press conference in light of giving up explosive plays, having a 4-7 record, not necessarily tanking per se, but trending in a downward position. Ron Rivera also mentioned the fact of there's a lot of maturity and celebration that needs to be fixed and tuned out for certain players. And it seemed obvious to some insiders, including Sam Fortier and JP Finley from 106.7 The Fan, that it was pointed at towards Benjamin St. Juste and Emmanuel Forbes, who are basically cornerbacks in the Commanders secondary, and they're basically the most consistent celebrators, right? And look, it's kind of always been a pet peeve of mine, whether I'm watching the game or I'm looking at, watching the game on TV, attending in person or whatever, but it's always been one of my biggest pet peeves, and people can chime in here if you feel, you agree or not, that, whether it's linebackers or secondary, they make what you think is a routine play, basically doing your job, and they'll get up and act like they basically just won an Emmy for their performance, right? And it's like, look, like you literally just defended the guy really well and he didn't catch the ball. If you make an interception, if you bat the ball away on a critical down, if you do something else like kind of a little extraordinary, go ahead, have your celebration. But for literally, when you're running down the field for 30 yards and the ball goes off the guy's fingertips and he doesn't catch it and you start celebrating, like, I don't get it, dude. Just knock it off, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's super interesting. And, the other part is, Ron Rivera keeps echoing, look, I can only control what I can, as long as things are doing what we want them to be doing and going in the right direction. And they seem to be doing that overall. It's a positive. And even though they're trending kind of in the right direction, the outcomes of the game just aren't what we want them to be. So it'll be interesting to see how, the team reacts on a short week going into Dallas. But before we preview the Dallas game, let's take a look at our weekly sponsors. As we know, first up is Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al. You can contact him at 1-800-HURT-123. He can handle all of your motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' comps, personal injury claims. He has 3 convenient office locations located in Philadelphia, PA, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, PA. If you have a legal need or need the use of a lawyer or even just a consultation, call Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al. Mention the fact that you saw him on Out of the Box Sports, specifically Commander's Gridiron, and he'll hook you up. That is 1-800-HURT-123, Attorney Big Al, Jason Fine. Last but not least, we have our great friends at Monkey Cult Coffee. Use promo code OOTB Sports for your online discount to get your favorite blends of coffee. Try their newest blend, which is an organic blend, Peru La Florida, along with the bourbon chocolate chip, toasted coconut rum, or the Sumatran blend, as well as get all of your coffee needs, coffee mugs, coffee t-shirts, coffee apparels, coffee grinders, and everything else. Remember to use promo code OOTB Sports at monkeycultcoffee.com for your online discount and get all of your coffee needs. All right, as we jump into the second half of tonight's show, we all know that we come up against the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday afternoon. And look, as Dave says, hey, we're looking forward to it. Happy Turkey Day to you. Yep, and happy Turkey Day to you too. I'll be working at the firehouse, unfortunately, on Turkey Day. But, it'll be interesting to see, hopefully we don't get too many calls that I can actually sit down and watch the game. Game starts at 4:30. It's the middle game of the triple header. And as Eddie says real quick, hey, don't celebrate on the routine play. Absolutely, my friend. I'm not a fan of that. It would drive me nuts if I was a coach. And absolutely, if I was a coach too, it'd drive me bonkers. You celebrate on the routine shit that, basically is doing your job, and then you missed a big play, and it's like, hey, look, just stay focused and do it. So we won't touch on what the Cowboys did last week too much, but you kind of have to. I always look at kind of where the team was the week before that we're playing against the upcoming Sunday. And as we all know, Dallas Cowboys went into the Carolina Panthers, who were basically 1-8, to the Cowboys 6-3. And look, the Cowboys came out on top to take them to 7-3, make the Carolina Panthers 1-9. Cowboys got a victory of 33-10 over the Carolina Panthers. Now, look, let's be honest, the Carolina Panthers aren't very good this year. Bryce Young is basically on his back more than Sam Howell, and look, the kid's a good athlete, kid's a good quarterback. He just doesn't have a good system and a good offensive group around him. But, we got to focus on the Cowboys because that's who we're playing on Thursday, right? And, it's always interesting. And I tell, my cohorts of them 215 boys on Wednesday nights, Dave and Paul, look, it's all about what Dak Prescott is going to show up for what game on any given Sunday. And, even though Dak didn't put up stellar numbers on Sunday, he did enough of what he needed to do to lead the Cowboys to a win over the lowly Panthers, right? And, Dak was 25-38, 189 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Pollard did what Pollard does, just, helping to grind out the game with 12 carries, 61 yards, and 1 touchdown. And, it was kind of interesting, but their leading receiver this week was Brandon Cooks, who had 3 receptions for 42 yards. Typically, it's kind of reversed that CeeDee Lamb is usually at the top. But, between Cooks and Lamb and some of their other offensive weapons, it's showing that, hey, look, they're spreading the ball around and they're kind of doing what they need to do to move the offensive down the field. Dak Prescott didn't have any interceptions, which I think was huge for them. So, like I said, they did what they needed to do. Hey, as Paul says, what's up, buddy? Thursday, 4:30, Commanders versus the Cowboys. Maisie and Chloe say hello. Yep. Last night we did a little cat rehousing between us. So, hopefully those cats can bring some good juju and put some Commanders vibes into the DC household or into the Cowboys household over there, right? But, look, let's be honest. The Cowboys kind of had a mediocre performance, but they scrubbed out 33 points. They had 311 total yards, only 204 passing yards. And, they kind of did what they needed to do. Time of possession was pretty equal. It's just the fact that Carolina sucks, right? Dallas didn't give up any sacks, which was huge. Dallas didn't have any turnovers, which was huge. So it'll certainly be interesting to see where, what happens to the game on Thursday between the Cowboys and the Commanders. And as we always know, look, Dallas and the Commanders always play each other hard. And I didn't get a chance to look at it today, but, I can tell you that as of, let's see, today is Tuesday, yesterday, last night, actually, the Commanders are opening as an 11-point underdog against the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday afternoon. I expect that to actually probably grow a little bit, maybe not more than 15. Vegas doesn't usually like to go too high in double digits for favors, but look, let's be honest, it'll probably be a 13, maybe 14 spread against the Cowboys. But we always play the Cowboys tough, so it'll be interesting to see kind of what we can do with them and where we go from there to kind of see what kind of competition we can give them, right? But I think even if they do 11, look, I would love to think that we could cover that spread and, at least keep it within 11 points. As Danny says, hey, go Commanders, anybody but the Cowboys, right? That, I would like to think that we could do that. However, for where we are as a team, it's all going to depend on turnovers, right? And Dallas has a really good defense. So if we can limit the turnovers, look, we're probably going to have one, maybe two, but we can't have three. And we can't have three or more. If we have three or more, we're definitely losing this game. If we have 1-2, it'll be close. We're probably still going to lose, but we're going to give them a fight for the money, right? And it's kind of super interesting because, look, as third year defensive end, edge rusher, stellar player Micah Parsons is, fellow Pennsylvania graduate from Penn State University. He was on a show recently, I think it was yesterday morning, talking about the Washington Commanders and, basically his attention and respect that he has for the Commanders. And he says, quote, "This is a really good team. When you turn on the tape, they've been close to beating the Eagles. They fell short just a little bit, but it could have went either way in both games. The Giants game, I don't even really count that because of the amount of turnovers, 6, between the running backs and the quarterback, right? So he kind of agrees that, hey, look, had we not had 6 turnovers, we would have beat the Giants. And we should have beat them the first time too. The Seahawks game was down to the wire. Could have been either way. So this is a team that can be in a positive any given way. They remind me a lot of the Chargers. They're a really good team. The ball just doesn't roll to your side sometimes. This is a team that could and should be on a positive track with the amount of talent that they have. It's a team that we need to take very, very seriously. And it's kind of interesting that he says that on a couple of levels, right? One, because he does have some respect for the Commanders. It's an interdivisional game. Look, for whatever reason, and we all know this, in the NFC East, when we play interdivisional teams, it's kind of always like bringing out your A game, right? You might play some other teams in other divisions or even non-conference games throughout the year that you might not getting their best effort. They might be looking at the next week's game. They might not have recovered from the previous week's game, good or bad, etc. But, when we play the Cowboys, that rivalry is always there, and it's always a good one. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But like I said, I think we can give Dallas a run for their money. Limit the turnovers. That's number one. Number two, if we can even remotely protect Sam Howell, look, Dallas is going to get a couple sacks. Let's not act like they're not going to. But if we can keep it at like 6 or less, it's another contributing factor to give us a possible chance to win this game. Number three, it's going to be interesting to see how our defensive plays. Is our defense going to be Swiss cheese, or is it going to be a little bit more of a block of cheese, right? And how much we let through. It's kind of the bend, don't break theory, that we need to limit the big plays. One of which, obviously, as we alluded to, a couple minutes ago, we're pretty good at giving up big plays. But, it kind of is what it is. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Unfortunately, I think this still results in a Commanders loss on Thursday afternoon. I'm guessing that we're going to think that, as Dave says, look, division games are always tough. You know that. And exactly, right? And it'll be interesting to see what you guys say tomorrow night on them 215 boys on your show and how you preview this game, knowing that, look, the Cowboys are just way better than the Commanders at this point in time, but it is what it is, right? As Paul chimes in, hey, look, it's right now, Dallas is laying 11 with the over-under at 49. Man, over-under at 49. I got to think you got to take the over on that, or at least I'd like to think so, that, look, we're going to give the Cowboys probably 30 points. Let's just be honest, call it as it is. We're probably going to give the Cowboys 30 points. And, look, if we can limit the turnovers, we're probably going to put up 25 to 26 ourselves. So, this could be a pretty decent scoring game. I would probably take the over on the 49, but man, 11. Ooh. I don't see us covering 11 just because of the way our defense is. But I got to go over on the 49 and under on the spread. We're not going to cover that spread of 11. Like it's probably going to be a 2 touchdown difference between the Cowboys and the Commanders on Thursday. You got to think. If you're looking at what the Cowboys are doing right now and the ball that they're playing, they're doing really well. And especially if you get the good Dak Prescott that shows up, you're going to be rolling on Thursday. Even though we just got Cody Barton back from the IR. They said he's going to be ready to go on Thursday. But, as of today for the injury report, Emmanuel Forbes didn't practice. He's been out the last 2 days. Hudson didn't practice, linebacker. Harris, linebacker, didn't practice. James Smith-Williams actually went to IR, so I'm not sure why they had him listed as a DNP for today. AG was limited, which was good because he was out Sunday with a toe injury. Quan Martin was out Sunday with a shoulder injury, but he was limited today. Curtis Samuel, they listed him as a toe injury, but he was full. So that's kind of interesting to see. Barton, like I said, they brought him back from the IR, so he was a full participant. And Cosme, who's going to be needed on the offensive line, was a full participant as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens and kind of how that transpires. One of the good things to look forward to, even though we're probably going to get a drubbing from the Cowboys on Thursday, is the fact that the halftime show for the Cowboys Commanders in Texas is actually going to be country star Dolly Parton. So if you think the game's getting long in the first half, just tune in a couple minutes longer, watch Dolly Parton at halftime, and hopefully she can help you out, right? So it'll be interesting to see where that goes and where the second half of the Commanders game goes as well, going into Dallas. Like I said, I think we're going to cover that 49 or take the over on the 49, but I still see Dallas getting high 30s, maybe even a 40er on us if they can get the right Dak Prescott out on the field. And as Paul says, the boys play soft of Thanksgiving past games, and this is a division game. Question is which Dak shows up, right? 100% right. I say that all the time. And, look, this is the first of our 2 meetings against the Cowboys. For whatever reason, we didn't play you guys early in the season like we usually do. So this is the first one on Thanksgiving, and then you guys come to FedEx later in the year. As Dave says, working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living, right? Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how we do on Thursday. The bigger thing is, if and when we lose, which is probably going to happen on Thursday, what's going to happen to the coaching staff, right? So there's a lot of talk that, Ron Rivera, JDR, and a couple other people weren't fired after this past week against the Giants because of the short week on Thanksgiving. So then the question is going to be, are those guys going to get fired on Friday and have a 10-day window, for EB to take over, be the interim coach? I'm not even sold on the fact that, those guys are going to be fired on Friday. I'm just not sure what's going to happen with that. I would like to think, to some extent, those guys are going to be around for a couple more weeks. Now, whether that's, kind of an indirect way of tanking, so to speak, I don't know. But, we'll see what happens. So before we close out tonight, and it's kind of been depressing because we've been losing so much over the last couple of weeks. I kind of wanted to look at something a little bit more lighthearted and even kind of a funnier thing. So, anybody that's watching, listening, feel free to chime in, throw me some ideas or your suggestions. But, with this being Thanksgiving week and, look, Turkey Day being 2 days away and I'm working at the firehouse, everybody going to be gathering around the table, stuffing themselves full of turkey and watching some football, triple header. I wanted to talk about what is the best Thanksgiving movie. And, for 2 to 3 minutes here, before the show tonight, I actually went online and typed in, best Thanksgiving movies or, favorite Thanksgiving movies. And unfortunately, all of the lists and ratings that came up were basically like Christmas movies or holiday movies that are seen on Thanksgiving. They kind of get people ready for get ready for the holiday season. And it's kind of not exactly what I was looking for, right? Like I was looking for like truly Turkey Day, Thanksgiving-ish movies, right? And unfortunately, I couldn't really find anything. There's a couple, decent ones, so to speak. So we'll kind of run down the list. And it's not necessarily movies per se, because as I thought I was going to come up with this like top 5, top 10 list of movies for Thanksgiving, but it's kind of more like TV shows and stuff like that. They kind of encompass what I was thinking about. So here we go, right? And like I said, feel free to comment, drop me a line, give me a list of some of your favorite Thanksgiving movies or even Thanksgiving stuff in general before we close out the show for the night. But in no particular order, first one that came to mind was Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, right? You got to love the Charlie Brown specials. You probably watched them from the time you were 5 years old until you're 50 years old. In my case, 43, going to be 44 in a month. But, who doesn't love Charlie Brown holiday episodes? Throw in some Snoopy, throw in some Woodstock, watch the shenanigans between, the Charlie Brown clan and, kind of get the point of the holiday season, whether it's the Christmas special, the Halloween special, the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. But in this case, Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, right? That's number one. Number two was a movie called Thanksgiving. It actually came out like just a couple years ago, I think. It's actually a horror flick, but it actually looks pretty good. One that I had never heard of before, but one that I'm going to end up probably watching at some point in time this week, probably on Thursday or Friday. I'll pull it up on the laptop while I'm at work and give it a whirl. Another one is Home for the Holidays, right? And I've never seen this movie before. I probably don't even remember it, but it's up on the list. Every list I've been watching and looking at over the last couple hours for Thanksgiving movies. So, another one up there. Hey, as Evan says, good game, brother. Long live Tommy D, right? Yeah, Tommy. Oh, Jesus. As I was joking on Sunday during the Big Blue Power Hour and last week's NFC East War Room, I was comparing Tommy DeVito and Danny DeVito, basically in the Twins movie, and which one could do better and which one would be worse, right? But we kind of got the answer on Sunday that Tommy did what Tommy had to do, and got New York to win. But back to our list, the next movie I found that I don't think I've ever seen either was called Soul Food, which is basically a Thanksgiving movie. The last two, which I think are both classics in their own medium and right. Number one, Mrs. Doubtfire. Who doesn't love a good Robin Williams comedy, especially when you dress up as a woman, play the housekeeper, granny, and, set your boobs on fire while you're trying to cook a turkey and, go from there. Great flick. Might have to watch it again. It's been a while since I've seen that one, but, it kind of makes you think of Thanksgiving as well. Last but not least, for those of you that are kind of in the older statute, myself or older generation, you're going to remember a TV show called WKRP, which was a radio station based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And who could not forget, if you have like probably not even a half hour because of commercials and everything, but go to YouTube, type in WKRP Thanksgiving episode or turkey episode, and I guarantee you will laugh your ass off for probably 25 solid minutes. And basically the premise, without giving it all away, is WKRP's Thanksgiving episode was they're going to do a Thanksgiving event for their community in the city of Cincinnati, where they're going to drop frozen turkeys out of a helicopter and give them to anybody that caught them or basically landed on the ground. And it's basically, pure comedic pandemonium that ensues and just absolutely hilarious from start to finish. And as Paul says, hey, look, Home for the Holidays, great movie. Even when I was talking to Danny before the show started, he was talking about, Home for the Holidays and their cast of characters and the premise of that movie. So definitely got to give that a watch. But like I said, if you've got a quick downtime, pull up WKRP's Thanksgiving episode. You won't go wrong, and highly recommended. 2 thumbs up. So with that being said, we've covered all of our topics for tonight here at Commander's Gridiron. Next week, we actually recap the Dallas Cowboys loss, more than likely, that happened on Thanksgiving. We will look forward to the game coming up. Actually, we do. We have one more game coming up before the bye week. We will see if anything off the field happens, most notably with any coaching changes, staff changes, anything to that sort. It'll be interesting to see, as I said numerous times tonight, whether one coach, numerous coaches, interim coach gets announced, kind of moving forward. We'll have to talk about any of those changes that come up next week. But more importantly, have a good holiday. Stuff yourselves full of food. Be safe. If you do drink responsibly. Enjoy the family time and have a good holiday. And I will see you all next Tuesday night for Commander's Gridiron. Same time, same place. I'm your host, Steve Lockman. Have a good night.